Srivastava, an international rated chess player and also an active chess coach. So today we are going to discuss another important chess topic, which is that of weak squares. So when we say about a weak square, first thing which comes in our mind while playing, that what exactly a weak square is. And do we have any kind of weak square on the board? So to clarify this, we will look at a position as an example. The weak square is the square in which one player has greater control over that square than the other player. While analyzing the weak square, we also be aware of few important things, like which player has the greater control over the weak square and how he will use it for his advantage. To watch out for a weak square, first we must know about the pawn structure. So in this example, we may see that every single pawn of black are at light square, while the majority of white pawns are at dark squares. As we know that the pawn takes any other piece one square diagonally, so that we can say that black has more control over the light squares in this position and white has more control over the dark squares in this position. In other words, for black, potentially weak squares are along the dark squares, and for white, the weak squares are along the light squares, this position. I'd like to mention here, whatever I have told you about the phenomena of weak square, that is in respect of pawn structure. But how major pieces will influence these weak squares, we are going to discuss it further. You also might have heard that pushing pawns create weakness, as many chess players and authors say that. In this case, black pawns are more advanced than that of white pawns. So what exactly is happening here? We are going to look into that. White queen is attacking on black pawn on d5, and also white rook on the b file is attacking on the black pawn on b5. If rook takes b5, a takes b5, then rook will take the black rook on a8. Previously, I have told you that black has potentially weak squares along the dark squares. But due to the influence of the major pieces of white, black has also general weaknesses at some light squares as well, like the pawn on b5 and the pawn on d5. If we look at the position from black's side, we could see that black has some light squares where he has more control due to the advancement of the black pawns, but the black could not place any piece over these light squares also. So we can say that, however, white and black both have the weak squares, but the situation is far worse for black here. We can see that black has weak pawns at b5 and d5, and also weak squares at f6, d6, c5. And also white rooks are totally controlling the dark squares at a5 and b4. Now we will see what exactly happened here. Black played queen e6. Idea is to prevent the pawn on d5. Also, black is planning to move his king to e7 square for playing f6 and also connecting the back rank rooks. Here, white can easily play rook cross b5 to take one pawn, but white wanted more out of this position, so he played queen f6. If queen takes f6, pawn takes f6, that f6 square for white pawn lies on a set of weak squares at g7 and e7 squares. So totally exploiting the position by playing queen on f6. Black played queen c8, preventing the pawn at a6 and rook at c8 square. Here, white played f4. So you can see that white queen is controlling the diagonal through f6 to h8 square and also the square at e7. So stopping the black king to come on e7 or g7 squares. Black played queen b7, white played rook a5. So here you can see how white is using the dark squares in which he has the control. So in this position, if we think about the advancement of the black pawns at b5 and c4 square, we can see that suppose if this black pawn on b5 is at b7 to b6 position, it can easily kick out the rook on a5. And also if the c4 pawn is at c7 square, black can easily play c6 or maybe c5 further for achieving the more convincing position. So now we can see how this kind of advancement of pawns is creating the fundamental weakness for black. Black played king e8, white played rook a1, putting the pressure on a6 pawn. Now black played b4, a counterplay. Pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn, rook takes d5 pawn. Now black returned back his queen to the b7 square. Here white played e6. Now the black resigned. The idea of white is to place his rook at d7 square to win the game. And if black queen takes the rook on d5, white queen will take the pawn on f7 check. King will move at d8 square and the pawn will go to the e7 square check, and white can easily win the queen at d5 square. So we have seen that how the proper identification of the weak squares made so easy for white to win the game. So I hope this example made quite clear the concept of a weak square. Thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.